In the early 1970s, sale of Hasbro's G.I. Joe action figure line began slagging in the United States, leading to it to eventually be discontinued. However, G.I. Joe didn't exactly vanish off the face of the planet Earth, as a Japanese toy manufacturer called Takara licensed the right to do Joe figures in their country. Takara's Combat Joe action figures were 8 inches tall, which was smaller than the 12-inch of their American counterparts, and proved popular enough to produce a spin-off called Henshin Robo, or Transforming Robot. It was a soldier that was augmented by robotic parts. Henshin Robo would then get a spin-off of its own called Microman, which took off in sales to the point that the Mego Corporation brought it to the United States under the name Micronauts. But the story of Micronauts is a different story for a different time. For now, we need to stick with Microman and look at one of their spin-off lines, which was called Diaclone. Diaclone were large transforming robots, or giant mecha, that were originally piloted by the Microman figures. Though initially popular, Diaclone wouldn't really take off until Takara dropped the Microman compatibility and just had the transforming robots operate on their own. That success would bring about the attention of Hasbro, who would license the spin-off of the spin-off of the spin-off to their original toy line in 1983, with a planned launch for 1984. Time was of the essence for Hasbro, as it turns out there were other transforming robot figures from Japan hitting the market, such as Tonka's GoBots, which were based on the Machine Robo line from Hopi Toys, and even Knickerbocker Toys, best known for the Raggedy Ann and Andy dolls, had their own line of transforming action figures from Japan called Mysterions. However, Knickerbocker would eventually fall by the wayside just before they were actually pitching Marvel on a tie-in comic to the Mysterions, as Hasbro wound up purchasing the company and absorbing the property, never using it at all. Much like they had with their G.I. Joe relaunch, Hasbro would also approach Marvel with the idea to develop character traits and backstories for the Transformers. Initial character design would be given to legend Denny O'Neil, but he would leave shortly thereafter, really only contributing the name of the heroic leader of the Autobots, which was Optimus Prime, and that he should have the personality of Abraham Lincoln. Instead, sales manager Bob Budiansky would provide the background of the Autobots and the Decepticons. Though initially solicited as a 4-issue miniseries, Transformers would actually go on to run for an additional 76 issues. And today, we're looking at the first 13 issues of these 80-issue, 4-issue limited series. This is Marvel's other prominent toy licensed comic of the 1980s. We're looking at Transformers Classics, Volume 1. Long ago, the planet Cybertron circled a star known as Alpha Centauri. Cybertron was not organic, but rather technologically based. The beings evolved, called Autobots, created what appeared to be a utopia. That is, until a power-hungry group called the Decepticons rose up and tried to take things over. Led by the ruthless Megatron, the Decepticons waged a war that devastated Cybertron, depleting all of its resources and even knocking the planet out of orbit. When Cybertron entered into the path of an asteroid belt, Autobot leader Optimus Prime boarded a ship called the Ark to blaze a trail through the rocky field. However, Megatron and the Decepticons pursued and attacked the Ark, knocking it off course and careening towards a small planet called Earth. The Ark would eventually crash at the base of an active volcano in what we now know to be Oregon, called Mount Hillary, where it would be trapped for the next 4 million years. When a nearby mining operation somehow activated the Ark's computers, probes were sent out to scan for life. The probes encountered various vehicles piloted by human beings that had evolved on planet Earth, aiding the Autobots and Decepticons gaining the ability to adapt into a vehicle mode. Yeah, I know, I'm calling them vehicle modes, even though Megatron turns into a gun, Soundwave turns into a boombox, while Ravage, Rumble, Laserbeak, and Frenzy turn into cassette tapes, but just for sake of ease, we're going to refer to it as vehicle mode. Though both factions revive at roughly the same time, the Decepticons have a little more fuel left in their reserves and set out to find a fuel source in order to return home to Cybertron. The Autobots left behind resolve to find a peaceful way to return home, but admit they need to stop the Decepticons first. To do so, Optimus Prime sends out Bumblebee, Huffer, Brawn, and Wheeljack to do some reconnaissance. The Autobots happen across a drive-in where young Buster Witwicky and his girlfriend Jess continuously distract Third Wheel O by making out. Bumblebee inadvertently rear-ends Buster's car, tipping everyone, including the Decepticons, to the Autobots' presence. A large fight breaks out, and Buster is forced to take cover in Bumblebee, who has no other choice but to try to get him back to the Witwicky garage. The commotion brings out Buster's father, Sparkplug Witwicky, who's disturbed to see his son working on a car that he didn't actually leave in. But that's not really important right now, as it appears that Bumblebee is seriously wounded, leaking fuel, and apparently dying. And yes, this is where we have our first bit of confusion with the animated series that ran concurrently with these comics, as in that show it was Spike Witwicky, not Buster Witwicky. Basically what happened was there were 3 possible pitch names for this human character that Hasbro had: Butch, Buster, and Spike. The animation went with Spike, the comics went with Buster, and Butch kind of remains forever unseen. However, Spike would eventually migrate over to the comics, with the storyline being that he was Buster's older, college-aged brother. As dawn breaks, the Decepticons make their way to the Black Rock nuclear power plant. Ravage is used to scout the place by hiding himself in a news reporter's tape recorder and recording the power output to return to Megatron. Upon receiving the results, Megatron resolves to enslave the human race in order to get back to Cybertron and orders an all-out attack on the plant. The Decepticons proceed to strip out the plant's generators without somehow irradiating both themselves and everyone in the surrounding area, and then begin setting up their own forward operations base. Back at the Witwiki, Sparkplug does his best to fix Bumblebee. Obviously, the parts aren't too different, but the idea of operating on a being that's alive makes it feel more like a surgeon, cutting for the very first time. Eventually, Bumblebee is able to transform again and agrees to take Buster back to the Ark to see what can be done about the fueling problem. Along the way, Buster stops to apologize to Jesse and O for vanishing last night, not knowing that Ravage has smuggled himself into O's boombox. Upon reaching the Ark and explaining things to the Autobots, Optimus Prime resolves to peacefully negotiate with the humans, offering advanced Cybertronian technology in exchange for fuel. However, they'll need to take down the Decepticons first, which they just aren't strong enough to do yet. So it's off to the Witwikis to see if Sparkplug has managed to devise an efficient fuel source. Of course, the Decepticons are lying in wait when the Autobots arrive and attack. In the chaos, Megatron grabs Sparkplug and tosses him to Starscream before Prime can blast the mechanic free. The Autobots really can't pursue, so that it appears now the Decepticons might have access to their fueling technology and thus a leg up to Cybertron. Now, this is where things begin to take a bit of a bizarre turn, as issue 3 of the Transformers features an appearance from none other than the Amazing Spider-Man, alongside the likes of J. Jonah Jameson, Robbie Robertson, and S.H.I.E.L.D. agents Nick Fury and Dum Dum Dugan. Now, the fact of the matter is, at the time, Mattel had the toy rights to new Marvel heroes, including Spider-Man, with the only exception being his black symbiote costume, which is why he's wearing it. Now, the really odd thing is, if you own the physical copy of this collection, Spider-Man just kind of appears as this weird black shadowy figure, but for some reason in the digital collection, he's just relatively untouched. They didn't alter him at all. Sparkplug is taken back to the Decepticon base where Megatron orders him to work on his new fuel additive for his crew, not the Autobots. If Sparkplug refuses, then his family is toast. Meanwhile, the Autobots have no other choice but to tap into the Ark's fuel reserves to hopefully face off with the Decepticons one final time and get Sparkplug back safely. While there, Ratchet turns up some very unique historical information, but it'll have to wait for later. Added to all of this, the giant robot fights in the middle of downtown Portland have attracted all the attention of both the American government and the press, with the Daily Bugle dispatching Peter Parker to cover the events outside of Decepticon headquarters. Peter switches inside his Spider-Man outfit to slip inside the base, but encounters gears of the Autobots doing reconnaissance. They begin squabbling as Sparkplug finishes his fuel additive, fully powering the Decepticons. The Autobots arrive, and Spidey lends a hand in trying to halt the Decepticons by grabbing Sparkplug and getting him to safety. Everyone manages to fall back to the Ark, but Sparkplug is outed as having aided the Decepticons. He tries to defend his actions, but the stress causes him to suffer a massive heart attack. Optimus is magnanimous enough to allow Ratchet to take Buster and Sparkplug to the hospital while he looks through the historical documents that were found earlier. Yes, it turns out that the Decepticons' chief battle strategist, Shockwave, had actually been tailing the Ark through the asteroid belt with the possibility of rescuing his brethren after they crash-landed on Earth. However, the asteroids mucked up Shockwave's navigation systems, and instead he wound up landing in the region of Earth known as the Savage Land, which is an area of the Marvel Universe Earth in Antarctica that was genetically mucked around with by an alien race called the New Wally that allowed dinosaurs to survive through prehistoric times. It's best known as the home of jungle-based heroes Kazar and Shauna the She-Devil. The Ark detected Shockwave's presence and sent a probe that scanned several dinosaur species, creating Snarl, Swoop, Slag, Sledge, and Grimlock, aka the Dinobots, who managed to take down Shockwave before mysteriously disappearing. With this new information, the Autobots prepare to teleport to the Savage Land and possibly locate the Dinobots for further aid. However, all of that gets interrupted by the Decepticons attacking the Ark. Even though they are fully charged, the Autobots still aren't strong enough to take down their attackers. That is until the Decepticons all begin mysteriously losing consciousness. It turns out that Sparkplug put a corrosive acid in the fuel additive. Sadly, it turns out that the Autobots still can't get a break, as soon they all get blasted by none other than Shockwave? You remember how I said that Transformers was originally a 4-issue miniseries that got switched into an ongoing? Well, that 4th issue was supposed to culminate in Optimus Prime standing triumphant and declaring an end to the Autobot-Decepticon war. Obviously, when it got switched to an ongoing, that ending got changed to Shockwave popping up and attacking everyone. So how exactly did Shockwave return? Well, it turns out one of the probes the Ark sent out in 1984 found and revived him. Shockwave catches up on the happenings in the world the only way he knows how. daytime television. He begins focusing on a news report covering a BlackRock Industries offshore oil platform. Mr. BlackRock has a new security system designed by girl genius Josie Beller. Shockwave then walks by the strung-up bodies of the Autobots and enters a room containing his recharging Decepticon brethren. Megatron awakens to Shockwave, informing him that the Decepticons now have a new leader. After all, Megatron was so easily swindled by Sparkplug, why shouldn't a more logical being like Shockwave now be in charge? Buster and Ratchet get Sparkplug to the hospital, with the cover being that the Elder Wickie was working on the ambulance when he suffered his heart attack. Sparkplug manages to pull through, but feels that it's just too dangerous to be around the Autobots, and tells Buster that it's time to say his goodbyes. Ratchet takes Buster back to the Ark, where the two see Shockwave leave, and a few recharged Decepticons guarding the opening. Responsibility falls to Buster to sneak by the larger robots and make his way through the Ark. He hears the voice of Optimus Prime calling to him as he enters a room containing the Autobot leader's severed head. Prime still functions, but he needs Buster to carry something by attaching 2 electrodes to his head. Buster receives a large shock and briefly falls to the floor unconscious. Meanwhile, Shockwave attacks the BlackRock oil platform. Josie Beller activates her new security measures, only for Shockwave to cause a feedback loop that electrocutes the young operative. GB BlackRock finds an unconscious Josie and takes her to the hospital, as Shockwave lets the two leave as a warning to anyone who tries to get in the Decepticons' way. Shockwave sends a victory message to the Decepticons, except for Megatron, who has to stay behind at the Ark. Shockwave briefly returns to the Ark, where he explains his plan to Megatron. It's been 4 million years, so there's a strong chance that Cybertron might not even still be around. To that end, he needs to create more Decepticons, and for that, he's going to need the Autobot creation matrix located in the head of Optimus Prime. However, Megatron is now fully charged, and he breaks free to once more take over from Shockwave. While that plays out, Buster wakes up and makes his way to Ratchet in order to take himself home. GB BlackRock and Josie do play a sizable role in these comics, so we'll wind up returning to them later. Shockwave and Megatron battle throughout downtown Portland. Megatron may be fully charged, but Shockwave is stronger and soon overwhelms the former Decepticon leader. Megatron's beaten and battered body is dragged back to the Ark, where he'll be forced to perform lowly repetitive tasks before being donated to an inner-city middle school. The other Decepticons are so impressed by Shockwave they immediately pledge fealty to him and are then dispatched to take care of the BlackRock oil platform. Meanwhile, at the hospital, GB BlackRock watches the Decepticons completely overwhelm the oil platform as he receives word that Josie Beller has been completely paralyzed, save for some slight minor movement in her right arm. She's still able to do some tasks, though, and has several pieces of special equipment moved into her room. Meanwhile, Ratchet returns to the Ark, where he finds Shockwave's carnage, including Prime's severed head. Optimus tells his trusted medical officer that he'll need to find the warrior within as Megatron sneaks up behind the two. However, before any beatdown can commence, Shockwave calls in to literally demand the head of Optimus Prime. Seeing how browbeaten Megatron is, calls for Ratchet to propose an alliance and locate the Dinobots who defeated Shockwave so many years ago. Also, Buster returns to the Witwicky garage and begins working on a car that Sparkplug hadn't finished fixing yet. It's then that Buster is stricken with a massive headache that somehow allows him to reassemble the car with relative ease. Ratchet and Megatron enter into a truce, though both really know what's eventually going to happen, and Ratchet makes his way to the Savage Land. He pieces together the Dinobot's last known whereabouts and locates Slag and a few others at the bottom of a tar pit. A scan of Slag's memory banks reveals that the fight with Shockwave resulted in a rock slide which buried the villain and drove the heroes into the nearby tar pit. Ratchet then reactivates Slag and convinces them that they're on the same side. Back at the BlackRock Hospital, Josie Beller goes into business for herself and begins using the equipment in the room. Fueled by her rage against the beings who attacked her, Josie begins constructing an exoskeleton to allow for full range of movement. From now on, Josie Beller goes by the name Circuit Breaker, and she uses her new bionic exoskeleton to attack both the Autobots and Decepticons, as she blames both robot races for her current predicament. She can actually remove the exoskeleton, but she will return to her paralyzed state. Ratchet reactivates the other Dinobots and begins preparations to meet with Megatron. Before the Decepticon can pull off his betrayal, the Dinobots attack him and drive him over the edge of a cliff. Megatron does manage to transform into gun mode before dropping into a deep snowbank and covered by rocks. Ratchet returns to the Ark and reactivates the other Autobots. Unfortunately, there's still the tiny problem of Optimus Prime being stuck in Marie Antoinette mode. The problem is that the Autobots are still nowhere near strong enough to take down Shockwave and his forces. To that end, Jazz and Wheeljack are dispatched to discuss the idea of an alliance with GB BlackRock. As this happens, BlackRock himself announces the creation of an anti-robot weapon. Two things. One, no, the weapon is not Circuit Breaker, though she has revealed herself to GB BlackRock at this time. Also, the cause of Buster's splitting headaches is the fact that Optimus Prime transferred the creation matrix into Buster's brain, or at least a portion of the creation matrix. Not only that, but this has resulted in his newfound prodigious mechanical assembly abilities. BlackRock prepares to debut his new anti-robot gun, but annoyingly winds up taking a seat inside Jazz. While taking the CEO on a brief joyride, Jazz explains the Autobots' stance on helping humanity and needing help with the Decepticons. BlackRock agrees to help, but this is all witnessed by Circuit Breaker, who not only sabotages BlackRock's anti-robot gun, but confronts him about it during the press conference. That, in turn, winds up getting interrupted by the Decepticons arriving and destroying the anti-robot gun. Jazz and Wheeljack try to help BlackRock, only wind up being attacked by Circuit Breaker. BlackRock pleads with his now former employee, I guess, to take the attack to the Decepticons, and she finally does by taking them down. At the end of the day, though, this was just a one-off, and she still considers both sides to be her enemy. I mean, can you really blame her? Shockwave isn't too upset as he completes his first new line of Decepticons. The group, who all transform into construction equipment, are Scavenger, Mixmaster, Longhaul, Bonecrusher, Scrapper, and Mook. They also have a really big secret. They can combine to form an even larger Decepticon called Devastator. I suppose this is where you're expecting me to play the whole I'm trapped beneath the enemy's scrotum bit from Transformers Revenge of the Fallen, but unfortunately at 7 seconds long, that is just too long to not get copyright claimed on YouTube. Sorry. The newly minted Constructicons take down a nearby truck stop and destroy a vehicle owned by a teamster named Bomber Bill, who winds up joining the pursuing Autobots, who locate Soundwave connecting to a massive satellite transmitter to contact Cybertron. Devastator is formed and is soon brawling with the Autobots, except for Huffer, who can destroy the dish but freezes at the last second as it could lead to a way home. That changes when he sees Bomber Bill in danger and the dish is soon destroyed. The Decepticons fall back to their base, however Shockwave once again is not displeased as he's created a new Decepticon, Jetfire. More fun with naming conventions here, as Jetfire was actually known by Skyfire during the animated series run, and that was because the mold for Jetfire actually belonged to a different company than Takara. It actually belonged to Bandai, as it was part of their toy line based on the animated series Super Dimension Fortress Macross, which was licensed by an American company called Harmony Gold under the name Robotech. So yeah, Skyfire or Jetfire really doesn't pop up much at all during this. Unaware that the Autobots have secretly infiltrated the BlackRock plant, Shockwave orders the head of Optimus Prime to activate Jetfire. It doesn't happen, which can only mean that Prime no longer is in possession of the creation matrix. Shockwave looks up some security footage from the Ark to see Buster sneaking his way and attaching his cables to his head, and realizes where the matrix is. To that end, Laserbeak is dispatched to dispatch of Buster. However, Bluestreak and Bumblebee have already been sent on ahead of the Decepticons. Buster is actually out with Jessie on a date, and Sparkplug is reluctantly forced to take the Autobots to the location, while Laserbeak piggybacks in a pizza guy's tape deck. A massive confrontation breaks out as Bluestreak explains what happened with the Matrix. It's then that a somehow activated Jetfire arrives, only for Buster to literally disassemble the machine with his mind. The group then heads off for one final face-down with Shockwave and the Decepticons. However, Shockwave has an ace up his sleeve and orders the head of Optimus Prime dispatched in a nearby bog. Ratchet and the other Autobots follow Shockwave to the bog and retrieve it just after it gets dropped inside. After placing it upon Prime's body, Prime is so grateful that he promptly attacks the other Autobots. Except the Autobots expected something like this might happen and used it as a distraction to have Buster infiltrate the Decepticons' headquarters via a newly reconstructed Jetfire. Unfortunately, the high altitude causes Buster to pass out, which means Jetfire returns back to his original programming and brings Buster to Shockwave instead. Thankfully, though, this turns out to be a blessing in disguise, as Buster is now very close to the actual head of Optimus Prime. Buster reawakens and orders Jetfire to return the proper head of Optimus Prime to his body. Jetfire manages to complete his task at the Autobots' lowest point, and the newly reformed Prime manages to defeat the other Decepticons with ease. He then squares off with Shockwave for one last time, finally driving the leader into the bog and killing him. For now. Finally, Buster manages to return the creation matrix to Optimus Prime. Of course, there's still a lingering problem with the fact that we have no idea what happened with Megatron. Until now. Joe Slick is a small-time crook in deep to the mob, in particular a Don named Jake Lomax. While on the run from two goons, Joey falls into a small ravine and finds a gun in a nearby drainpipe. It turns out that the gun is an amnesiac Megatron, and Joey uses him to work his way up through both the Mafia chain and rob banks in order to pay off his debt. Finally, Joey confronts Lomax and takes down all of the Don's crew. However, during one brief final tussle with the Mafia boss, Megatron is dropped on what is apparently his head, which causes all of his memories to return. Joey knocks out Lomax, and Megatron elects to spare Joey's life to return to leading the Decepticons. And that concludes our look at Transformers Classics Volume 1. How was it? Well, on the plus side, I do think the artwork is pretty solid throughout all of this. It doesn't change too much, even though there's kind of a rotating panel of artists throughout the whole thing. It's very solid all the way through. And there's some pretty decent characterization in this. The Decepticons in particular do feel truly menacing. Unfortunately, that's kind of where the praising sort of ends. This thing is really, really dialogue heavy, to the point that it just kind of bogs a lot of the story pacing down. I mean, there's just kind of giant walls of text in the panels that sometimes take up more than the actual picture itself. It just makes it feel really, really slow and turgid sometimes. Not to mention, there are kind of a lot of plot holes throughout this. Like, okay, Shockwave needs the creation matrix to make the new Decepticons, but he seemed to have no problem activating Jetfire and the Constructicons. So why does he need the creation matrix? It seems he could just do it anyway. See what I mean? Not to mention the last story with Megatron and the mobster is just really kind of lame. It's not very good at all. And let's address the kind of elephant in the room. In 2022, it was announced that IDW no longer has the license to any of their Hasbro comics, so these reprints are beginning to get scarce. I was able to get a digital copy, and it's not until the end of 2022, so you might still be able to find a few copies out there. If you're looking physical, yeah, those are already starting to go way up in price. Like, I've looked online, I think I found one for about $170. So yeah, you're starting to see that happen. The prevailing rumor at this point is that the Hasbro license is actually going to move over to Robert Kirkman's Skybound imprint at Image, but I can't say for certain. So unfortunately, availability is going to start to come into question with this whenever you're watching it. And that's kind of why I have to give Transformers Classics Volume 1 a D. It would be higher, but again, those availability issues might start playing into it, so that drops it down a level in my book. Sorry. And with that, let's see what we'll be doing next time on the Random Trade Review. Remember, you can help support my channel at patreon.com/sleepytimeforcatproductions. There, you can request a trade to be put in the randomizer, aka the cardboard box. Also, remember, like, comment, share, subscribe, and ring that notification bell.